So good morning, everyone, and it's my pleasure to be here today. Do my best every now and then to glance at my phone for the clock to see how I'm doing on time. But I'm Ann Schlenker from the Chicago area. So think of the Department of Energy out of Washington, D.C., and within that Department of Energy, they have 17 national laboratories where they do fundamental science and engineering work to further the agenda of the United States and certainly a lot of international work as well. Within those 17 national labs, 11 of them do transportation research, and within smart mobility, autonomous vehicle kind of space, there's about 5 or 7 that are really at the forefront of the research for the federal government, and that's what I'll speak of here today. So I want to give you a little snapshot of a program that the Department of Energy is actually running, and I'm going to weave that with some efforts that the Department of Transportation is also doing, just in case there's not a full awareness of those programs and what all they entail within the research space as they try and move the agenda forward. So obviously transportation is changing. We're all living in this, whether it be a revolution or if you view it as evolution, but there's a lot of disruptive factors that are impacting the industry. Certainly the US population growing, population density within urban areas is certainly increasing at 75% of the population in those urban dense mega regions. Technologies and fuel devices are changing and developing and giving new options to customers. And of course, transportation costs are high, second only to housing expenses that we have. And if I take you a step further into transportation costs, and this is just one monetary look at it, where we talk about fuel costs, we talk about outlay of money directly, and time costs. You know, it's been portrayed that over 40 hours a week is 40 hours a year, we give up a whole week of vacation time just to congestion, above and beyond our normal commute time. In certain areas, it's far higher than that. So with it, it brings stress, it brings frustration, it brings anxiety to our lives as well. And there's other factors also beyond just monetary and time, right? We've got air pollution issues, we've got climate change concerns, so there's other externalities beyond a financial impact. So new technologies and new business models then are evolving and coming to the forefront. Things like shared mobility. As we talk about sharing economy, everything about sharing, and you know things like Uber and Lyft, right, as we talk about shared services within transportation. Mobility on demand, so connectivity itself, and how that gives me access to real-time information, and I will make different decisions about my mobility choices. So mobility on demand and how it's shaping your life. Goods on demand. We probably all, or most of us anyhow, have an Amazon app on our phone, and we're into e-commerce rather than big block stores. The availability of goods to your doorstep, whether it be groceries, whether it be diapers, whether it be furniture, whether it be paper goods, certainly has shaped the way we interact now with our shopping experiences. Connected and automated vehicles, and I always encourage people to take a pause and remember that this is not a new journey. That coming from the auto industry and passive safety that we got engaged in decades and decades ago, and then when we moved to active safety and all the great things that we were able to accomplish with reductions in fatalities for on-highway deaths, all those sensors that we started putting onto the cars and interacting and taking control of the car and giving information to drivers really started this path for autonomous vehicles. And now with the capabilities of some of these sensors and with, and we're going to hear from NVIDIA, the fusing capabilities for the sensors and the processing power. This is really the technology that I believe has allowed us to even have a real go, if you will, for autonomous vehicles. So emerging fuels and powertrains, as all of these other things are changing, whether it be e-commerce, mobility on demand, autonomous vehicles, what does even the shape of a car want to be? What's the durability, reliability have to be as we talk in the future? What's the powertrain of choice going to be within this? Uncertain at this point. Sometimes the political will have a particular policy motivation that will drive some of that, but we all need to stay tuned to it. And then, of course, new modes of transportation coming up. Everything from bike sharing to, of course, walking and pedestrian, but more than that. It's car to go, car sharing itself, sharing of ownership of vehicles, purchasing a particular car and then supplementing your needs with other options through rental or other on-demand services. And one of the really revolutionary things that's happening is there's a lot of new partnerships and a lot of new entrants into the space. So whether it be Waymo and Apple and Tesla a few years ago, these partnerships are really shaping the industry as well. You know, who's going to be the manufacturer of record for these? What's the revenue stream as you look at the whole value chain of services coming across? So it is very disruptive, and no silver bullet, no clear answer at this point, but a lot of development activities happening. I want to share you just a few slides now from the Department of Transportation. Remember, I'm Department of Energy, Department of Transportation on the other side. And within that, they have multiple offices, whether it be Federal Highway, Federal Transit, NHTSA, National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. But they did a report that talked about 2045, what is the vision for traffic? And this was published about 2 years ago, but just in case you're not familiar with it, they talked about some of these external factors. You know, the population increase, the congestion, the older Americans, and how we're redefining longevity and the services that we're going to need. The millennials and what their interaction with technology really is, and how their appetite has changed for mobility. Some of the underserved population and the income inequity that exists. And then actually beyond urban areas, as we've defined with borders, the expansion of that into mega regions. And I suggest that the solutions that sometimes are afforded into urban areas are not the same solutions that are necessary into rural or corridor areas. And as I come into this community here of 20,000 people or so, you can't forget that fatalities are actually higher on rural roads than what they are in the urban areas. So different set of challenges, but every bit as important to us. So how will we move things? You know, transportation and the economy. We can't just think about personal movement and mobility as to how we get to point A and B. There's more than that about the goods and services that we deliver as well. So freight volume is increasing exponentially. And I will say that Amazon comes to not my door, but my kids' door every single day, every day. You know, rather than driving 5 miles down the street now, it is just easier to click it on your phone and have it delivered. So what's the ramifications of all that? You know, have we studied it and understood it, both from a traffic flow and a congestion aspect, but also from an air pollution and energy demand, a climate change aspect as well. So the cost of congestion is really a holistic systems look that we need to do, and then the impact of energy and, as I said, some of those pollution criteria as well. How are we going to move that's going to be easier? So connected vehicles, I suggest that whether you go back to OnStar, or if you're a subscriber to DSRC, and some of the announcements that are out for the shortwave radios that are going to be put into vehicles to communicate back with the infrastructure, or if it's instead 4G, 5G is your particular communication route. But all of this real-time travel information and the connectivity between cars, between infrastructure, if you just pause for a minute and think about the messaging that you now see, where you'll get a road sign that will say traffic ahead, and congestion suggests that you exit this route, or maybe you're a Waze user instead, right? And so it's going to reroute you into a different community. I say 5 years ago, we didn't believe it, right? Real-time traffic on your monitor in your car in the center stack, maybe 20% of the time you believed it, and the rest of it you said, oh, it's probably clear, it's old information, I'm not going to follow that information. Well, now times have changed, and most often it's completely accurate. And so we believe that, we secure the path that's recommended to us, and it helps us to save time. So this connectivity, this communication back to us has really changed our behaviors within transportation. And then how are we going to adapt? Knowing that there are changes in weather, changes in climate that we're experiencing, heating up. In fact, I think it's about 15 degrees cooler here in Mississippi than what it is back in Chicago for a change. So sea levels, again, depending on where you are in the political spectrum of climate change and CO2, certainly there are changes within weather and climate that need to be addressed. One of the other things that DOT has done is they put together a Smart City Challenge a couple of years ago, and it was for mid-sized cities. So about 200,000 to 800,000 population. And within that, I believe they had 78 applicants. And beyond the applications themselves, one of the really interesting things for me was that the problems that the cities were trying to solve were very similar. And it isn't just even that mid-sized city, they fit elsewhere also. So when you think about first mile, last mile solutions, how you get to and from the bus. Are you gonna walk? Are you gonna bike? What happens in bad weather? Am I going to go, instead of a bus, to a metro train line? How do I get there on time, reliably? So that first mile, last mile was a big issue. The data collection for ridership on the buses, from the students, from the population itself, and how you optimize system efficiency for runtime. So a lot of analytics around the data collection is important. Climate change and reducing carbon emissions for ozone action days or whatever is impacting the local population, and asthmatics as an example. The movement of goods within a city itself and how that can impede traffic as you're doing a beer drop-off or you're doing a FedEx drop-off along the way, and how that interrupts some of the other movement that we see. The parking itself and parking infrastructure. As we pause and think about autonomous vehicles, what does that mean about parking and the parking revenue that many urban areas rely upon now to help feed the city itself? And then how you optimize the traffic flow. So all of these were the key takeaways out of the Smart City Challenge. Columbus actually won it, Columbus, Ohio, but a lot of other cities are actually embarking on this path and doing some demos and trials and test beds to try out different solutions to solve these problems with sharing across the enterprise. So a very worthwhile opportunity. So I will say, as these new opportunities, they have created a Department of Energy program that's called Energy Efficient Mobility Systems. And within that, we're trying to bring together and harnessing the research teams across the national laboratories, looking at all of these, shared mobility, the mobility on demand, goods on demand, et cetera. So one of our first tasks was really to look at connected and automated vehicles and say, well, what is the bookends? What do we expect from an energy footprint out of connected and automated vehicles? And the uncertainty was frightening from research aspects. We said that there's the potential for a 200% increase in energy consumption, and conversely, there's a 60% opportunity to reduce energy. And somewhere in between lies the answer. Well, that was certainly not satisfying at all. Right? Where's the error bar on this? So what's the issue? Why so much variability? Well, what can increase energy? Connected and automated vehicles. Well, I hail Uber and Lyft, but all of a sudden I have a lot of deadhead trips, empty trips, and it's still largely one single rider, regardless of Uber Pool and other things that are coming forward. It's still most often a single rider or passenger for that driver. So a lot of empty miles, and early research has said maybe 30% empty miles for an increase of VMT. Easier travel, so I'm unburdened from traveling. So does that mean I'm going to travel more? So again, the rebound effect of travel itself. The underserved population, and Clay spoke of this a little bit as well, whether it be special needs, whether it be elderly, underserved, those that were unable to afford an individual private-owned vehicle. Now all of a sudden they have access to a subscription service or a mobility on demand, and you pay per mile. So all of a sudden I have more customers into the pool for mobility and for transportation. Well, how do I reduce energy? Things like eco-driving, things like platooning, close coupling of vehicles, change in the aerodynamic flow across the vehicles right-sizing, because, again, as I just spoke of, 1 or 2 passengers within a car, do I need more than that? Am I overbuying for trips currently that I could right-size instead? So this 200 to 60% is really the foundation of what we're trying to improve upon. So how are we achieving some of these goals then? And here's where the Department of Energy launched the Energy Efficient Mobility Systems Program. And they have many aspects within it. Achieved advanced R&D projects that they've done direct funding into programs. They've created the Smart Mobility Lab Consortium, and I'm a steering committee member of that, and I'll show you a couple of slides on that as we move forward. They've done some seed projects in HPC. There's a few of the national labs that have the big supercomputers available for user facilities and scientists. So we're tackling some of those big data problems within transportation. For a system, for a city to be able to do visualization as well as algorithms and analytics on that data and give it back to customers. Core evaluation and simulation tools, and then living labs, which really means demonstration and deployment tests out into the field to do lessons learned and broadcast those widely. So within the consortia then, we have 5 pillars for smart mobility. And within those, we call those our research themes. So connected and automated vehicles being one. Another, the advanced fueling infrastructure, really around electrification and what you might need within the support, whether it be dynamic wireless charging, whether it be static wireless charging, or DC fast charging, level 2 AC charging as well. Urban science, what's the built environment want to look like as connected and automated vehicles come in or e-commerce comes in? How does urban landscape change? Multimodal transportation as well. And then this was one of our, as I advocated for this program all the way back into 2013, one of our biggest challenges was the soft side for the Department of Energy. So the mobility decision science, the behavior piece, we're not trying to influence people, but just understanding how people interact with mobility and transportation solutions. So that is a cornerstone of this whole program, and within that there's survey work and interviews and focus groups that are critical as well. So we have 7 labs participating in 30 plus projects, 65 researchers that continues to grow, and about $34 million is where we're at on it. So what type of questions are we trying to tackle within the future mobility scenarios? Certainly the national level energy impacts, vehicle level energy impacts, ownership models that are changing, how freight's moving, the interactions with the built environment that I spoke of, this behavior. And I'll draw your attention to the last bullet on the slide because it really talks about mobility, energy, productivity. So it's developing a different metric and a measure, knowing that there's more to mobility and transportation than simply VMT and energy use. So how do we account for the convenience, the quality of life, the economic opportunity that you're now afforded because you have access to mobility, whether that be access to education, to healthcare, to good food choices, all of that factors in as well. So we're working independently initially with the Department of Energy across the national labs for this new metric, and then we're going to coordinate and have started that dialogue already with the Department of Transportation so that we have some commonality into that. So stay tuned for it, because it's actually a pretty big step for all of us to move beyond just energy consumption and to recognize all these other factors. So I'm going to give you 5 quick slides to say, well, what are you tackling within those 5 research themes, connected and automated vehicles being the first one up. So what are the energy technology and usage implications of connected and automated vehicle technologies? How are they going to operate in the real world? What are the critical levers to promote eco-cab solutions? So the first picture shows you some platooning of trucks. Okay, well, some have suggested that's going to be the first thing out of the gate, right? That if there is a 6%, 8%, 10% improvement in the truck for fuel consumption, and they're very sensitive to cost of ownership and pricing because of the fleet and the driver model, that this is going to be a home run and everyone's going to adopt it. Well, pause, because it's going to take some state regulation, but even more than that, how do you optimize the system? If I'm a FedEx truck and all of my trucks that I want to platoon are FedEx, okay, probably easier. But if it's a FedEx and a UPS and a postal truck, and truck 1 has a different benefit than truck 2 and truck 3, then how do I manage all of that for the revenue share? So there's more than just the easy, this is going to happen. And on the opposite side, we now know that the close coupling brings forward thermal problems on following trucks that takes some additional redesign. Or if you have to wait to platoon more than 2 or 3 minutes, you might not want to do it because the cost of time is more important for that driver than what the platooning benefit is. So there's more than just platooning is going to be there, and we're going to see it going all the way across Texas. I think there's still quite a few issues to resolve. Mobility decision science, this is the human element, the behavior out of it. What are the impacts on your lifestyle and your lifestyle trajectory, how things are going to change for driving and for travel. Consumers and companies, how they make travel decisions, short, long, and medium term. And then what mechanisms are available to influence consumer decisions. Department of Energy prides ourselves on being fact-based, science-based, not into the policy space, but generating data for others to make determinations on what the appropriate policy really is. Multimodal transportation. What's going to change in the future from shipping to rail over to our roads? What commodities should move or can move? And then as we look at burdens and opportunity space within some of those travel modes on rail, as an example, is it the most appropriate commodities that are moving, or should there be other influences within that? Interactions between mass transit and transportation network companies. So this is in the news frequently. And cities are concerned because they don't understand the interactions. And I don't mean to just pick on Uber and Lyft because there's many other companies that are out there, but they're the mainstay that folks can relate to. So as those become services into a community, Do they cannibalize mass transit, or conversely, do they provide that first mile, last mile solution to get people to the mass transit, whether it be bus or rail? It's an unknown. There's some concerns on both sides right now. Advanced fueling infrastructure. So this really speaks to planning for the infrastructure itself. This graphic that you see in the corner really is about, I would say, a buckshot sort of approach to EVSEs, electric vehicle supply equipment, into a particular area, and then how Seattle, with a scientific approach over to where are your owners, where are your projected purchasers of electric vehicles and plug-in vehicles, what's a more scientific approach as to where the adjacency ought to be for some of those EVSEs, both at home and at public infrastructures, and help shape what that built environment's going to ultimately look like to be able to give the most satisfaction back to the users. And as I speak of urban science here, this really is about the built environment. If automated and connected vehicles become mainstay, do we now have mobility districts whereby they are car-free zones? So I have a curb drop-off issue, and what kind of space do I really need for that, either at education or hospitals or main shopping districts, as an example? What do I do with parking lots? An awful lot of urban space right now is devoted to parking. Maybe I no longer need those, and instead I need drop-off areas and I need remote lots to be able to handle some of these moving automated taxi-type vehicles. So what's the long-term role for the built environment, and how's that going to be shaped, and how do I morph existing built environment as compared to how I might change zoning laws in the future for parking and density changes? So I'm going to close with this last slide that really speaks to some of the research, because I posed a lot of questions, but didn't give you a snapshot of we're doing real work and solving and bringing forward some answers. So the three charts that have a green banner over the top suggest that this is favorable for energy. So connectivity can reduce, for example, the number of shifting events with the vehicle, how I control the transmission because I understand the environment. So certainly improve the energy of that particular vehicle. How I can know the environment itself and then control vehicle speed and powertrain control. Another option to improve vehicle level energy efficient. If I can connect and know the traffic signals, and probably even control them for right-of-way, for red, yellow, green, beyond just telling the driver that you've got a red light coming up in 2 seconds. Instead, how I can manage flow, because in an urban area at times, 30% of your time is at idle. So how can I shorten that, reduce that down without having a disservice to those that are waiting? So there's some equity that has to be thought about in this. But the same story over this is favorable for energy. And then the red one is traveler behavior. So there's other reds. I wasn't just picking on people, but the choices that we make. When you think about mobility, we all have a different set of values that we apply to mobility. Whether it's important to you for speed to get to point A and B, whether it's important for the environmental footprint that you leave behind between A and B, whether instead you have motivation over I want to travel by myself because it's decompression time to and from work. Conversely, I want to travel with others because it's a social outing. So all of these are factors that go into your decisions over how you travel. But this particular one on red says that if I'm a level 4, level 5 connected automated vehicle, the finding is that your value of travel time, and this is the inverse, it just is the way the math works, but your value of travel time is reduced. So you're unburdened from driving, so you're now willing to be in the car longer, and so with that aspect, you will travel more. So vehicle miles travel will increase. Toyota suggests that actually people will live farther away and it will cause more urban sprawl because you'll be willing to be in the car longer because you're not focused behind the wheel. You know, that's another test bed and another assumption. So then what's the limit? Today you run out of fuel, right, at 500 miles, 600 miles, or maybe you need a bio break before that and so you stop. But otherwise you're in your car for 4 hours, 6 hours. Well, what's the limit then become as we move forward, particularly if you're electric vehicle or into these automated vehicles themselves? So that traveler itself is the one that we're watching and coaching on as well. So that's actually my last slide. Look forward to questions if we have time for those sometime today or within our dialogue boxes, but I appreciate the invitation today to be here with you. Thank you.